Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is walk away from someone who's suffering. And sometimes the cruelest thing someone can do is betray the person who saved their life. My name is Nathan, and this is the story of how I sacrificed everything to help my wife survive cancer, only to have her cheat on me. I'm 38 years old and work for a manufacturing company. The pay didn't make me wealthy, but kept me comfortable enough to support a middle-class lifestyle. I've been with the same company for 15 years, working my way up. I married Chloe after dating for 3 years. She worked as an administrative assistant at a medical office, and our combined income gave us a decent life. After being married for years, we owned a modest 3-bedroom house, both drove reliable cars, took occasional vacations, and were saving steadily for retirement. The early years of our marriage were solid, but not exceptional. We were compatible in the ways that seemed important at the time: similar backgrounds, shared friend groups, aligned views on money and lifestyle. We talked about having kids eventually, but never felt urgent about starting a family. Our relationship was comfortable and stable. But comfortable and stable slowly became routine and predictable. By year 5, I started noticing that we were functioning more as roommates than romantic partners. Conversations became transactional rather than intimate. We'd sit in the same room watching different things on our phones rather than engaging with each other. Date nights became less frequent and felt more obligatory than exciting. Our physical intimacy declined gradually over the years. In the beginning, we'd been active and playful, but by year 7 or 8, sex had become infrequent and somewhat mechanical. We'd go weeks without being intimate, then have a brief reconnection that felt more like checking a box than genuine passion. I tried to initiate romance, but Chloe often seemed tired or distracted. And eventually, I stopped trying as frequently to avoid the rejection. By year 10, we were having sex maybe once a month, sometimes less. Our emotional intimacy had eroded alongside the physical connection. Chloe would share surface details about her day, but rarely opened up about her feelings or thoughts. When I tried to have deeper conversations about our relationship or how we might reconnect, she'd deflect the conversation. I loved Chloe despite these issues. I'd committed to our marriage and believed that all long-term relationships went through periods of distance and disconnection. I kept trying to find ways to reignite what we'd had in the beginning. Some efforts worked temporarily, but nothing created lasting change in the fundamental pattern of our relationship. Looking back, we probably should have pursued marriage counseling years earlier. We had communication problems that neither of us knew how to address effectively. Chloe tended to withdraw when she was unhappy rather than expressing concerns directly. I tended to try to fix problems through action rather than really listening to what she might need emotionally. These patterns left us both feeling unheard and unfulfilled, but unable to break the cycle. Still, we weren't actively unhappy enough to consider separation. We had a functional life together, shared financial goals, mutual friends, and family expectations. The idea of divorcing over growing apart seemed unnecessary when we weren't fighting or dealing with serious issues. We were just existing together without much passion or deep connection. Everything changed during our 11th year of marriage. Chloe had been experiencing abdominal pain and bloating for several months, symptoms she'd attributed to stress and getting older. When the pain became severe enough to interfere with work, she finally went to her doctor for a thorough examination. After several tests and imaging, she was referred to an oncologist who delivered devastating news. Chloe had stage 3 ovarian cancer. The diagnosis hit us like a freight train. Chloe was only 36 years old, relatively healthy, with no family history of cancer. The oncologist explained that ovarian cancer is often caught late because early symptoms are vague and easily attributed to other causes. By the time Chloe's symptoms became severe enough to seek help, the cancer had already spread beyond her ovaries to the surrounding tissues. Treatment would be aggressive, immediate surgery to remove as much cancerous tissue as possible, followed by months of chemotherapy to kill any remaining cancer cells. The oncologist was optimistic about her chances given her age and overall health, but made clear that the next year would be grueling. Chloe would likely lose her hair, experience severe nausea and fatigue, and face a range of other side effects from the chemo drugs. In that moment, sitting in the oncologist's office, while Chloe cried and struggled to process the diagnosis, I made a silent commitment. This was my chance to show her how much I loved her, to prove that our marriage meant more to me than the routine and distance that had characterized recent years. I would be the husband she needed, the support system that would help her survive this nightmare. The sacrifices started immediately. Chloe needed surgery within 2 weeks, which meant I had to rearrange my work schedule to be available for pre-op appointments, the surgery itself, and her recovery period. My boss was understanding, allowing me to work remotely when possible and take time off for medical needs, but my career advancement essentially stopped. Projects I'd been leading were reassigned, and I dropped out of consideration for a promotion I'd been working toward for over a year. The financial impact was immediate and staggering. Chloe had to take medical leave from her job, which meant we lost her income entirely while gaining massive medical expenses. Even with insurance, we faced substantial deductibles, co-pays for every appointment and treatment, and countless out-of-pocket costs for medications, supplements, and comfort items that insurance didn't cover. I started pulling money from our savings account to cover these expenses. The emergency fund we'd built over the years disappeared in the first 2 months. Then I started cashing out portions of my retirement account, accepting the early withdrawal penalties because we needed money now, not in 30 years. I took out a home equity line of credit to keep us afloat when our regular accounts ran dry. By the end of Chloe's treatment, I depleted about 80% of our retirement savings, maxed out our home equity line, and accumulated significant credit card debt for medical expenses insurance refused to cover. The financial security we'd spent years building was gone, replaced by debt and uncertainty. I was 40 years old with almost nothing saved for retirement, working a job I couldn't afford to leave because we desperately needed the health insurance. But the financial sacrifice was nothing compared to the physical and emotional toll of becoming Chloe's primary caregiver. After her surgery, I helped her bathe, dressed her wounds, managed her pain medications, and supported her through the basic activities of daily living she couldn't manage alone. As chemotherapy started, I drove her to every appointment, sat through 6-hour infusion sessions, and then managed the brutal aftermath when the drugs ravaged her system. The side effects were worse than either of us had anticipated. Chloe experienced severe nausea that left her unable to eat most foods. She lost 30 pounds in the first 3 months, becoming frighteningly thin and weak. Her hair fell out in clumps, which devastated her despite knowing it was temporary. She developed painful mouth sores, neuropathy in her hands and feet, and crushing fatigue that made getting out of bed feel like climbing a mountain. I became an expert in managing these symptoms. I researched anti-nausea remedies and prepared the few foods Chloe could tolerate. I gave her medications on precise schedules, monitored her for signs of infection, and rushed her to the emergency room multiple times when her white blood cell counts dropped dangerously low. I learned to clean her port, help her through episodes of vertigo, and hold her while she cried from pain and fear. Chloe's mother and sister visited regularly, especially in the first months after diagnosis. They'd come on weekends, bring food, and sit with Chloe for a few hours. Her father called frequently to check in. My own parents, who lived across the country, offered financial support and made a couple of trips to help. But the bulk of daily caregiving fell on me because I was there, because I'd committed to being there, and because Chloe needed someone who could provide consistent, reliable support. The caregiver role completely transformed our relationship dynamics. Whatever romantic or intimate connection we'd maintained disappeared entirely under the weight of medical crisis. Chloe saw me as her nurse, her support system, her lifeline, not as her husband in any romantic sense. I saw her as fragile, suffering, needing protection, not as the partner I'd married. Our conversations revolved almost entirely around her illness. We discussed medication schedules, upcoming appointments, symptom management, and treatment progress. Our entire world narrowed to the singular focus of keeping Chloe alive through treatment. Physical intimacy became impossible and inappropriate. Chloe was in too much pain, too exhausted, too altered by chemotherapy to even consider sex. I wasn't interested either, not because I'd stopped finding her attractive, but because the caregiver role had completely reframed how I saw her. You can't be intimate with someone you're helping to the bathroom and cleaning up after when they vomit from chemo. I accepted all of this without resentment. Chloe's survival was the only thing that mattered. Everything else could wait until she was healthy again. I told myself that once she beat cancer, we'd rebuild our marriage. We'd reconnect physically and emotionally. The crisis would pass, and we'd emerge stronger for having survived it together. The treatment process took 8 months from diagnosis to completion. Chloe underwent 6 rounds of chemotherapy, each one slightly more brutal than the last as the cumulative effects wore down her body. But the treatment worked. Scans after her final round showed no evidence of disease. Chloe was in remission. The cancer that had threatened her life was gone. The relief was indescribable. We'd made it through the nightmare. Chloe had survived. As she recovered her strength and energy in the months following treatment, I expected our relationship to recover too. I imagined us rebuilding the intimacy we'd lost, reconnecting emotionally and physically, maybe even emerging from the experience with a stronger marriage than we'd had before. But Chloe's recovery took our relationship in a direction I never anticipated. As her physical strength returned, she seemed transformed in ways that had nothing to do with our marriage. She talked constantly about having a new lease on life, about not wasting the second chance she'd been given. She said the experience had shown her how precious time was, how quickly everything could be taken away. At first, this transformation seemed positive. Chloe became more active, more engaged with life, more energetic than she'd been even before the diagnosis. She joined a cancer survivors support group that met weekly. She started exercising regularly, taking long walks, and eventually joining a yoga class. She seemed happier and more vibrant than I'd seen her in years. But I began noticing concerning patterns in her behavior. Chloe started spending more time away from home, more time with her support group friends, and less time with me. She'd dress up before leaving the house. When I'd ask about her plans, she'd be vague, saying she was meeting friends or attending support group events, but never providing specific details. Her phone behavior changed too. Chloe had always been casual about her phone, leaving it lying around and not worrying if I saw messages. But now she kept it with her constantly, tilting the screen away when I was nearby and setting it face down whenever she put it down. When texts came through, she'd quickly glance at them and either ignore them or take her phone to another room to respond. Our emotional distance, which I'd expected would close as she recovered, instead widened. Chloe seemed less interested in spending time with me, less engaged in conversations about our relationship, less connected to the marriage we'd had before cancer. When I tried to talk about rebuilding our intimacy or planning our future together, she'd change the subject or say she wasn't ready to think about that yet. I tried to be patient and understanding. Chloe had been through trauma, and everyone processes survival differently. Maybe she needed time to fully heal emotionally before she could focus on our relationship. Maybe the support group provided validation and understanding that I couldn't offer because I hadn't experienced cancer myself. But the secrecy and emotional distance continued for months. By about 6 months post-treatment, I knew something was seriously wrong beyond normal recovery struggles. Chloe was hiding something from me, and my gut told me it wasn't just about needing space or processing trauma. I struggled with whether to investigate my suspicions. Going through her phone or tracking her movements felt like a violation of trust, the kind of behavior that would damage our marriage regardless of what I found. But the alternative was continuing to live with gnawing uncertainty and growing distance while pretending everything was fine. I decided to put a GPS tracker on Chloe's car. It was a small device that attached magnetically to the underside of her vehicle, connected to an app that showed me her location in real time. I justified this invasion of privacy by telling myself I needed to know the truth, that whatever was happening was already damaging our marriage, and that confirming my suspicions would allow me to address the real problem rather than just feeling anxious. The tracker revealed patterns I hadn't fully recognized. Chloe was indeed attending her support group meetings, but she was also spending significant time at another location, a residential address in a neighborhood about 20 minutes from our house. She'd go there 2 or 3 times a week, staying for hours at a time. These visits weren't mentioned in our conversations about her day or her plans. After about 2 weeks of monitoring these visits, I decided to follow her. On a Thursday evening, when Chloe said she was meeting a friend from support group for coffee, I watched her leave the house and then followed at a distance. She drove to the residential address I'd seen repeatedly on the tracking app. I parked down the street and watched Chloe walk up to the townhouse and knock. A man answered the door, tall, fit, probably in his early 40s. He smiled when he saw Chloe, and they hugged in an intimate way. She went inside, and the door closed behind them. I didn't need to see more to understand what was happening. The frequent visits, the secrecy, the emotional distance, the way they greeted each other. Chloe was having an affair. I drove home and waited. When Chloe returned 3 hours later, I confronted her immediately. I asked her directly where she'd been and who she'd been with. She tried to lie initially, saying she'd been at coffee with a friend. When I told her I'd followed her to the townhouse, she became defensive, accusing me of not trusting her and invading her privacy. I pressed for the truth. After about 20 minutes of back and forth, Chloe finally admitted that she'd been seeing someone from her support group. He was also a cancer survivor. They'd connected over their shared experience. I would later privately find out that their relationship had become physical about 2 months ago. I asked her why. After everything we'd been through, after everything I'd sacrificed to help her survive, how could she betray me like this? Chloe's response devastated me. She said I couldn't understand what it felt like to come back from the edge of death, to realize how quickly life could end, to feel like she'd been given another chance to really live. She said the new guy understood in ways I never could, because he'd survived cancer too. She said she needed excitement, passion, intensity, all things our marriage hadn't provided in years. She claimed she still cared about me, still appreciated everything I'd done for her. But she changed, and she couldn't go back to the life we'd had before. She needed to feel alive, to chase experiences rather than just existing in comfortable routine. I listened to her justifications, feeling numb. All the sacrifices I'd made, the depleted savings, the stalled career, the months spent caring for her through brutal treatment, had meant nothing. Or worse, they'd put me in the role of caretaker rather than passionate partner, making me part of the life she wanted to escape rather than the life she wanted to build. That night, I told Chloe I wanted a divorce. There was nothing left to save in our marriage. She'd made her choice, and it wasn't me. I'd given everything I had to help her survive, and the moment she could, she'd chosen someone else. Chloe seemed surprised that I was willing to end things so definitively. She suggested we could try counseling, that maybe we could work through this if I could understand what she'd been feeling. But I was done. I'd been present for the worst of her experience, had sacrificed my own well-being and financial security for her survival, and she'd repaid that by betraying me the first chance she got. The financial reality of divorce was grim. I'd already depleted most of our savings and retirement funds on Chloe's medical care. I had significant debt from the home equity line and credit cards. It was like I was starting over financially from a position worse than when I'd graduated college. But staying in a marriage where I'd been betrayed seemed worse than any financial hardship. I consulted a divorce attorney who laid out the process and likely outcomes. North Carolina allows for no-fault divorce, but we'd have to be separated for a year before the divorce could be finalized. Asset division would be complicated because I depleted marital assets for Chloe's medical care, which meant I'd be rebuilding from deep in the hole. I filed for separation and moved into a small apartment, taking only my personal belongings and leaving Chloe in the house we'd shared. The legal process began, exchanging financial disclosures, negotiating preliminary terms, scheduling mediation sessions to divide our limited assets and substantial debts. The divorce proceedings dragged on for months. Every financial document we had to review reminded me of what I'd sacrificed and how it had been for nothing. Statements showing the depletion of retirement accounts, medical bills I'd paid, credit card charges for comfort items and medications. All evidence of my commitment to a marriage Chloe had already mentally left. About 4 months into our separation, I received a call from Chloe that changed everything again. The cancer had returned, and it had come back aggressively. Her routine monitoring scan had shown multiple tumors in her abdomen. The oncologist was recommending immediate surgery, followed by even more intensive chemotherapy than the first round. Chloe was calling to tell me because, despite everything, I was still her husband. We were separated, but not yet divorced. And more than that, she was hoping I'd reconsider the divorce and be there to support her through treatment like I had before. I sat with my phone pressed to my ear, listening to her cry and explained the diagnosis, feeling a sickening mixture of emotions I couldn't untangle. Part of me felt genuine compassion for what she was facing. Cancer is horrifying regardless of relationship status, and I wouldn't wish that suffering on anyone. But another part of me was burned out beyond recovery. I'd given everything I had the first time, my savings, my career advancement, my physical and emotional energy, my entire life for months. I'd emerged from that experience financially devastated and then been rewarded with betrayal. The thought of going through it again, of sacrificing myself for someone who'd already shown me how little my sacrifices meant to her, felt impossible. I told Chloe I was sorry she was facing this again, but that I couldn't be her caregiver this time. I'd already given all I had, and she'd broken us when she chose to cheat rather than work on rebuilding our marriage. I couldn't carry this burden again for someone who'd shown me I was just a means to her survival rather than someone she actually valued. Chloe begged me to reconsider. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd been confused and afraid. She promised she'd end things with her affair partner, that we could rebuild if I'd just help her get through treatment. But her words rang hollow. She wasn't asking to rebuild because she loved me or valued our marriage. She was asking because she needed a caregiver and knew I was capable and willing to sacrifice myself. She'd already shown me that the moment she didn't need me, she'd chosen someone else. Why would this time be any different? I maintained my position. The divorce would continue. I hoped she'd find support through treatment, but I couldn't be that support this time. I'd sacrificed enough. The next several months were brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Chloe's aggressive cancer treatment made the divorce proceedings complicated. Court dates had to be rescheduled around her chemotherapy schedule. Asset division negotiations were delayed because she was too sick to participate effectively. The whole process that should have taken a year was dragging toward 2 years. Chloe tried repeatedly to contact me during this time, asking me to reconsider, to visit her, to help her through particularly difficult moments. I maintained firm boundaries, communicating only through my attorney and refusing direct contact. It felt cruel, but I knew that if I gave an inch, I'd be pulled back into the caregiver role that had already cost me so much. Through mutual friends and the small social network of our town, I heard updates about Chloe's condition. The treatment wasn't working as well this time. The cancer was more aggressive, less responsive to chemotherapy. She was struggling more with side effects, losing more weight, spending more time hospitalized with complications. I also heard that the people Chloe had prioritized during her recovery weren't stepping up the way I had. Her support group friends visited occasionally, but weren't providing daily care. Her family helped more this time, with her mother staying with her for stretches, but they couldn't replicate the full-time dedication I'd provided during her first treatment. Part of me felt guilty for not being there. The voice in my head that had been conditioned through years of marriage to put Chloe first kept suggesting that I was being cruel, that a good person would help someone suffering regardless of past hurts. But another part of me, the part that had finally learned to value my own well-being, knew that I'd already given everything I had to give. About 18 months after I'd filed for separation, I received a call from Chloe's sister. Chloe had been hospitalized again, and this time her condition was critical. The cancer had spread extensively, and the doctors weren't optimistic about her surviving much longer. Did I want to come see her? I struggled with that decision for hours. Part of me wanted to say goodbye, to have some kind of closure. But I also knew that going to see her wouldn't change anything about our situation or provide the kind of resolution either of us might want. Chloe and I had already said everything that needed to be said months ago. I decided not to go. It would be painful for both of us and wouldn't serve any real purpose beyond making me feel like I'd done the right thing by societal standards. I'd already spent enough of my life trying to be what Chloe needed while ignoring what I needed. Chloe passed away 3 days later, about 19 months after I'd filed for divorce. The legal proceedings ended automatically with her death, leaving me with a complicated mixture of feelings I'm still processing months later. I genuinely grieve for Chloe's death. She was too young to die, and cancer is a horrible way to go. I grieve for the person she was before illness, for the early years of our marriage when things were better, for the potential our relationship might have had if circumstances had been different. But I also recognize that I'd already lost Chloe years before her actual death. I'd lost her to the distance and routine that had characterized our marriage before cancer. I'd lost her again during treatment when our relationship transformed into caregiver and patient. And I'd lost her finally when she chose betrayal over rebuilding what we'd had. The guilt I anticipated feeling about refusing to help her through her second battle with cancer never materialized in the way I expected. Yes, I feel sad that she suffered and died. But I don't regret my decision to prioritize my own survival over hers. I'd already sacrificed everything once, and it hadn't been valued or reciprocated. Sacrificing myself again would have destroyed me without actually saving her. The financial recovery from Chloe's illness and our divorce will take years. At 40 years old, I'm starting over with significant debt, depleted retirement accounts, and a career that stalled while I was caregiving. But I'm alive, healthy, and free from a relationship that had become toxic long before cancer entered the picture. I've learned that sacrifice has limits, that you can't save someone who doesn't value what you're giving up for them, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is save yourself. Chloe's death was tragic, but staying in a marriage where I was valued only for what I could provide rather than who I was would have been its own kind of death. If you're in a situation where you're sacrificing everything for someone who doesn't reciprocate, where your efforts are taken for granted or actively undermined, know that you have the right to stop. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved by you specifically. Sometimes the hardest and bravest thing you can do is walk away from someone who's suffering. Not because you don't care, but because you've already given everything you had to give, and giving more would destroy you without actually helping them. Your life and well-being matter too, even when someone else's situation seems more urgent or sympathetic. I'll always carry complex feelings about Chloe's illness and death. But I don't regret choosing my own survival when faced with the choice of sacrificing myself again. Some lessons can only be learned through the hardest experiences, and mine taught me that love without reciprocity becomes self-destruction, and that knowing when to stop giving is as important as knowing when to give everything.